Rome est dans l'apostasie. C'est pas des paroles, c'est pas des mots en l'air que je vous dis, c'est la vérité. Rome est dans l'apostasie. On ne peut plus avoir confiance dans ce monde-là. Il a quitté l'Église, on quitté l'Église, il quitte l'Église.
But when we're dealing with these men, we have very serious reason to believe they don't have the faith at all. There's a long list of instances to prove that is true, that there's reason to doubt this, objective reasons to question it. At least, that's the very least you can say. Which means, like they said in during the Great Western Schism, right? A doubtful pope is not a pope. Papa dubius, papa nullus, because his authority is in doubt. They're not obliged to obey. A doubtful authority. You don't know if they have any real authority over you or not. And I think that's true of these modernist, post-conciliar popes. They're popes of the new order. They themselves claim that. So, but in any case, with regard to Archbishop Lefebvre and Sedevacantism, contrary to what Father Robinson has to say there, Archbishop Lefebvre himself made some very, very strong statements. He said what he said in the master stroke of Satan, obedience. He raised the question himself, okay? And he raised the question in my mind, and probably in the minds of others for the first time, the possibility that maybe Paul VI was not really a Catholic pope. But also, even in Oyster Bay, sitting around the table in Oyster Bay Cove, Archbishop Lefebvre said explicitly, I will not say that in this case it was John Paul II, I will not say he is not the Pope, but neither will I say that one can't say he's not the Pope. And his point there, I think, was again, there's a reason to doubt, to question. And it's not the fault of the person who's raising the question. It's the fault of the one who's doing the things that are causing the question to be asked. It's because of what these post-conciliar popes are doing and saying. It's what they're doing that is raising the question. It's not that we're just making this up for no reason. They're provoking this. They're demanding these questions. So let's realize the fault is coming from them. They're the ones who are doing this damage. They're the ones who are raising these doubts by what they're doing and saying. Yeah. It's not the fault of the person who's paying attention and questioning. It says here, Archbishop Lefebvre would not go along with the Sedevacantist position. He stated it would be Sism, also a dead end. Well, you see, there you have a problem here. It's not a dead end because people thought, well, if you have invalid popes, they appoint invalid cardinals, and invalid cardinals cannot elect a new pope. So eventually, you have all of these invalid cardinals who are made cardinals by invalid popes. And you have the invalid cardinals taking over, and they can't elect a new pope. And so you run out of popes. So basically, they're saying, these Sedevacantists are saying that the papacy is finished, that Christ's promise has failed, that the church is basically dying out without a pope, without Peter. And that's not true. That's not what they're saying at all. And now, a little more study, we realize what the College of Cardinals, as I've pointed out before, was a historical expedient. The church didn't always have cardinals. It was the clergy of Rome, the bishops and the priests and the deacons of Rome, who chose the Pope for 1,000 years, the first 1,000 years of the church's existence. This is how popes were chosen. And the cardinals were eventually created, as the church says of them, in order to represent those clergy of Rome. So it's not true to say that the church cannot have a pope without these cardinals. It's just simply not true. So it's not a dead end. But that wasn't immediately apparent, back then in the 1970s and so on. Yeah. But also, Archbishop Lefebvre said it would be schism. Well, it is schism to cut yourself off from the authority of the church. But that begs the question, because the question is that the authority of the church? That's the question. Is that really the authority of the church? Is this the authority of a successor of Peter? Is this truly the authority of a vicar of Christ who's doing these things? And that's a fair question. And when he says, follow the teachings and traditions of the church, well, the teachings and traditions of the church raised that question and have told us that's a fair question to ask. We see the example in the history of the church where the question was raised, and theologians approved by the church have told us that's a legitimate question to ask. There are circumstances that would require you to ask that question. That's following the teachings and traditions of the church. It's those who are saying, you can't even question that. They're going contrary to the teachings and traditions of the church. It's those who are saying, a pope doesn't need to have the Catholic faith. He can be a heretic. And as long as he doesn't try to dogmatically define a heresy, he doesn't have to be a Catholic to have the Catholic faith. And he doesn't have to be a Catholic even to be the head of the Catholic Church on earth. That is contrary to the teachings and traditions of the Catholic Church. So Archbishop Lefebvre, I think, understood this as a serious problem, but a real dilemma. I think he saw it as a real dilemma, because if you read consistently what he says, throughout the crisis that unfolded before him and that he was dealing with, I think he was actually rather conflicted by the whole thing.
Yeah.
So to break in at one particular point and say, this is the thinking of Archbishop Lefebvre, I think is not fair to Archbishop Lefebvre. I think you need to really study the entire history of it. Going back to 1976 and beyond, where he raised the question in the first place. Right?
We now present, in the form of a catechism, some of the Archbishop's statements favoring Sedevacantism. What are we to think of the Vatican II errors and the institution that teaches them? The Church which affirms such errors is both schismatic and heretical. This conciliar Church is therefore not Catholic. If a pope adheres to this new conciliar Church, what is the effect? To whatever extent pope, bishops, priests, or faithful adhere to this new Church, they separate themselves from the Catholic Church. Is it possible that even the Pope himself could break with the Church? To whatever extent the Pope departed from tradition, he would become schismatic. He would breach with the Church. Theologians such as St. Bellarmine, Cajetan, Cardinal Journet, and many others have studied this possibility. So it is not something inconceivable. Are we certain that Paul VI is a true Pope? While we are certain that the faith the Church has taught for 20 centuries cannot contain error, we are much further from absolute certitude that the Pope is truly Pope. Is it possible that Paul VI might not have even been a true Pope in the first place? Heresy, schism, ipso facto excommunication, invalidity of election are so many reasons why a pope might in fact never have been pope, or might no longer be one. What situation would Catholics be in? In this obviously very exceptional case, the Church would be in a situation similar to that which prevails after the death of a pontiff. What happens to a pope who fails in transmitting the truth? It seems inconceivable that a successor of Peter could fail in some way to transmit the truth which he must transmit. For he cannot, without as it were disappearing from the papal line, not transmit what the popes have always transmitted. Would he continue to be pope? If it happened that the pope was no longer the servant of truth, he would no longer be pope. Since religious liberty is, as you say, Monseigneur, heresy, and John Paul teaches it, shouldn't we draw the obvious conclusion? I would not say that the Pope is not the Pope, but neither would I say that you cannot say the Pope is not the Pope. Is it conceivable, Monsignor, that you yourself could become a Sedevacantist one day? You know, for some time, many people, the Sedevacantists, have been saying there is no more Pope. But I think that for me, it was not yet the time to say that, because it was not sure, it was not evident. If John Paul II continues his course of action, what will be the consequences? These recent acts of the Pope and bishops, with Protestants, animists, and Jews, are they not an active participation in non-Catholic worship, as explained by Canon Nas on Canon 1258.1? In which case, I cannot see how it is possible to say that the Pope is not suspect of heresy, and if he continues, he is a heretic, a public heretic. That is the teaching of the Church. What conclusions might you draw from John Paul's words and deeds? It is possible we may be obliged to believe this Pope is not Pope. For 20 years, Monsignor de Castro Meyer and I preferred to wait. But Monsignor, has the Pope left the Catholic Church? It is impossible for Rome to remain indefinitely outside tradition. It's impossible. For the moment they are in rupture with their predecessors, this is impossible. They are no longer in the Catholic Church. It would be possible, of course, to assemble a collection of quotes entitled Marcel Lefebvre Anti-Sedevacantist, or Marcel Lefebvre Recognize and Resistor, and one would find an equal amount of material. He was, in fact, all of these at one time or another. But the words we've quoted from Marcel Lefebvre Sedevacantist will suffice for our one purpose here: to shoot the hot air out of the Society of St. Pius X's cynical attempt through Messrs. Salsa and Cisco to demonize Sedevacantism and to paint those who adhere to it as the spawn of Luther. Don't believe it, folks. For Archbishop Lefebvre, Sedevacantism was a tenable position for a Catholic to hold. He initially laid down many of the principles that led us to it. And at several points during the life of his apostolate, he openly suggested that he himself, though but a retired bishop, might declare the Holy See vacant. And note something else. Archbishop Lefebvre certainly didn't hint that before doing so, he'd need to wait for the College of Cardinals or a General Council of Bishops to conduct a trial proving the crime of heresy, a thesis to which Messrs. Salsa and Cisco devote 100 pages of their wooden and indignant prose. The Archbishop, having been a missionary, was an eminently practical man. Whatever objections he may have voiced against Sedevacantism at various times, this artificial rigmarole certainly wasn't one of them. Had he become convinced that his duty as a Catholic priest and bishop for the good of souls was to declare the Holy See vacant, rest assured it would have been lock and load. And in the age of Bergoglio, the Pope who says there is no Catholic God, who countenances divorce, who approves contraceptives, what do you think Archbishop Lefebvre would be telling us about Bergoglio? Would it be to heed Salsa and Cisco's solemn warning to hold our fire until a college of cheesehead, balloon-carrying, sax-playing, jeans-clad modernist cardinals convene a general council of bishops against him? And then to wait for a public judgment against Bergoglio from a council of men like these? Are you kidding? Those of us who actually knew Archbishop Lefebvre have no doubt whatsoever about what he would say now. because he already said it nearly 30 years ago. Rome has lost the faith, my dear friends. Rome is in apostasy. These are not words in the air, it is the truth. Rome is in apostasy. They have left the church. This is sure, sure, sure. How right you were then, Monsignor. How right you still are now.